Welcome to Navigating Religious OCD. My name is Sariah Harrison, and I experience religious OCD, also known as scrupulosity. Scrupulosity is an incredibly anxious reality that hijacks your religious experience. Having been terrified of doing something wrong, having experienced deep fear that I would someday be sent to hell, and having been absolutely terrified of God, my goal is to share my real to help you heal through experiences, resources, and practical tools. Join me on this journey of navigating religious OCD. Hello, hello, friends. Welcome to episode 6. I'm excited today to share different subtypes of OCD and what religious OCD or scrupulosity is and how that can look. For the past few weeks, I've been describing the anxiety cycle and the OCD cycle with this anxiety cycle chart. Last week, I shared a quote from a book that just expressed our threats are no longer as external as they used to be. They're now more internal and they can come from the way we think. I also discussed last week that the brain can't tell the difference between a perceived threat and a real threat. If the brain perceives a threat to be real, it will treat it like it's real. It's super easy to see how anxiety can begin to take over, how there can be an unhealthy relationship with anxiety when we consider that we're not like the brain isn't only trying to protect us from physical threats, it's trying to protect us from any perceived threat. There's a need for a sense of safety in every area and aspect of our lives. So I've been using examples like the one with the hike and the rattlesnake to express and explain the anxiety cycle for a sense of physical safety. However, that same pattern and process applies for every aspect and area of your life. So it could be your sense of emotional safety or financial safety or social safety or spiritual safety that's feeling threatened. And this can activate the same fight, flight, or freeze response in the brain, the same alert and alarm system in the brain, this nervous system response that kicks into gear in an effort to protect you and to keep you safe, to get systems up and running so that you can be prepared to navigate a legitimate threat if it's actually there. It's really interesting with all of these different aspects and areas that this alert and alarm system can be activated. It might not be as strong as it would be if you saw a rattlesnake. Sometimes the response, the physical response, can be more gradual and more prolonged. And as a result, it can be more difficult to detect or to recognize. I've been experiencing this sense of prolonged, gradual, intensifying anxiety for the past few days because there have been perceived threats to my emotional, to my social, and to my spiritual safety. I was asked to give a talk in church. I love speaking in church. I loved the preparation. I loved the space for pondering that it provided. I just love bearing testimony of Jesus. So that was my topic. My topic was Jesus. As I was finishing up my preparation for my message, my thoughts were directed in a very different direction than they had been all week. And I felt very strongly that I should share pieces of my experience with religious OCD and how I've come to know Jesus through that struggle. And I was super excited. I was like, okay, absolutely. Can do, will do. Like, I love sharing my story. I love being real with people. I love being open and honest. I love the space that creates for real connection to each other and also to the Savior. Like, that's where He meets us, right? In these spaces that feel so broken. Anyway, so I was super excited to share my story, to follow through on this impression that I received, to just share very openly and honestly. Anyways, and there I was obviously like nervous, like excited and nervous. That happens every time I speak, but I love speaking. And so I was just like embracing this excited, nervous energy. Anyways, I spoke, and then for like hours after the talk, I was just like becoming increasingly anxious, like so crazy anxious. I was just analyzing the talk in my mind, and I was like so worried. Like, did I share too much? Did I use too much time? Did I share the right things? Did I share it in the right way? Okay, these are obsessions, like all of these intrusive, unwanted, anxiety inducing thoughts. I was just analyzing this, like my talk. I was ruminating about it, right? And I was feeling very drawn to seek reassurance from other people to know if it was okay, right? Like everything inside of me wanted to just like ask my sister who was there, right? Like, do you think it was okay? Like, what could I have done? What could I have done better or differently? Like, what did you think was good, right? This seems to be like a very normal and natural, like, oh, that's totally fine to do after you give a talk, Sariah. And I'm not saying that it's not okay to do. What I'm saying is I've had to look at the function that these different behaviors are playing in my life. And for me, in that moment, seeking reassurance from my sister would have been fueling the OCD because it was that desire to seek reassurance was being totally fueled by this effort to get away from the anxiety that the obsessions were causing. The obsessions were those intrusive, unwanted, anxiety-inducing thoughts that were having me like seriously question if I did my talk the right way, and if I shared what I actually needed to, and if I shared it correctly, right? Like there was lots of anxiety that was being built up from all of those thoughts, from all of those obsessions. And the effort to seek reassurance or to seek that validation from my sister, that would have been compulsive. That would have been my effort to get away from the anxiety. And in return, it would have fueled that OCD cycle. So it was just a really tough, like, few days because I was just experiencing pretty crazy high anxiety. And I was really struggling to know how to navigate it in a productive way because like all of the alert and alarm systems in my brain were fully activated, like overactivated, right? And they were just continuing to be activated as these obsessions just came back over and over and over again, right? Like as these intrusive thoughts and concerns about my talk came back repeatedly. It really felt like my social and emotional and spiritual safety were being threatened. And my brain was treating it like a very real threat. It was activating these alert and alarm systems, and it was bringing a lot of intense anxiety. Okay, so I feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but that was a real time example that I just wanted to share. Like the past few days have been so crazy, crazy hard. I was very grateful that I had a therapy session booked for this past Tuesday, and I was able to work through it more with my therapist. It was very helpful to have her outside perspective and opinion, and for her to help me see how what I was experiencing was very clearly OCD and what I could do about it, and how I could navigate that situation more effectively in the future. Okay, so in expressing my experience from this past week, I'm already diving into what religious OCD or scrupulosity is or how that can look. But before I dive into that more, I want to take a step back and explain different subtypes of OCD and how they can look. There's a ton of different subtypes of OCD, and I think there are way more than are formally recognized. Every subtype of OCD falls under the OCD umbrella. So there are obsessions and compulsions at the core of that experience. The difference between the different subtypes of OCD is the content that these obsessions and compulsions are centered around. So there's a super great article that I found on NoCD, and NoCD is just this site for individuals who experience OCD. They've got resources. They've got a place where you can find a therapist. You can type in your location, and they just have a whole bunch of licensed therapists who are specialized in OCD that you could get connected with. I've heard from many friends that I've connected with that this is how they found their therapist who specializes in OCD. It's really important with OCD that you do find a therapist who specializes in OCD and who knows how to treat it effectively. And this can be a great resource if you are looking for that. Okay, so that's at nocd.com, nocd.com. Okay, but they've got a really awesome article that I found on their site that just breaks down lots of different subtypes of OCD in a very simple way. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I would like to walk you through a few of them just to bring to light how OCD could look or how it could show up in an individual's life. As I was reading through this article, I was like, holy cow, yep, I've experienced quite a few of these. And that is actually super common. If an individual experiences OCD, it's likely that this experience with OCD is affecting many different parts of their life. Okay, so this article breaks down 20 different subtypes of OCD. I'm just going to start at the top and break down a few of them. The first one that they discuss is checking OCD. The article reads, checking OCD involves repetitive behaviors or mental rituals aimed at preventing harm, mistakes, or catastrophes. These checks are driven by doubt and fear, not forgetfulness or carelessness. So, some common obsessions with checking OCD, and these are going to be those intrusive, unwanted, anxiety inducing thoughts. Okay, so there might be persistent thoughts such as, what if I left the stove on? Did I lock the door? What if I made a mistake and someone gets hurt? Okay, these thoughts are going to bring a lot of increased levels of anxiety, and that's going to drive this individual to want to do compulsive behavior to try to get away from the anxiety that those obsessive thoughts are causing. Some different compulsive behaviors that might show up with checking OCD include repeatedly checking locks, appliances, or messages, mentally reviewing tasks or past events, seeking reassurance, such as asking people, are you sure I didn't mess that up? Right? All of this is just done in an effort to check things repeatedly to make sure that the individual is preventing what they perceive to be real threats for harm or mistakes or catastrophe. Another subtype of OCD is contamination OCD. This is probably one of the more well understood or well known subtypes of OCD. Contamination OCD involves fear of being harmed or harming others by germs, dirt, chemicals, or other forms of contamination. So, some common obsessions or intrusive, unwanted, anxiety inducing thoughts that could be present with contamination OCD include thoughts such as, what if I get sick from touching that? What if I infect my family? What if this space is toxic or unclean? Okay, once again, these thoughts are going to persist. They're going to loop, like they're going to come back repeatedly, and they're going to bring these increased levels of distress and anxiety. And that's going to drive them to want to do compulsive behavior in an effort to get away from the anxiety. Some compulsive behavior that could be present with contamination OCD includes excessive washing or sanitizing, avoiding people, places, or objects, replacing contaminated items. Okay, from the outside looking in, these behaviors can seem very excessive. But from the inside, like for an individual experiencing OCD, these behaviors are going to feel needed. Like it's going to feel like if they don't do them, something really bad could happen. I've experienced this. It's really difficult to not do something when your brain is telling you that you absolutely should, or else something terrible could happen. Okay, another subtype of OCD is hoarding OCD. Hoarding OCD involves the compulsive need to keep objects, often out of fear that discarding them will cause harm or regret. It differs from a hoarding disorder when it's driven by intrusive fears and compulsions. Okay, that's the foundation of OCD, right? We've got these intrusive fears or these anxiety inducing thoughts and compulsive behaviors. Okay, some common obsessions that might accompany hoarding OCD, or some persistent anxiety inducing thoughts that could accompany hoarding OCD include thoughts such as, what if I need this later? Or throwing this away might cause something bad to happen. Or getting rid of this feels morally wrong. Or what if I regret getting rid of this later? All of these thoughts bring a lot of anxiety, and that is going to drive the individual to engage in compulsive behaviors such as saving or stockpiling items in order to alleviate the anxiety that's being caused by the thought of, what if I actually need this later? Or what if something bad happens if I get rid of this? Or what if I regret getting rid of it? Another subtype of OCD is just right or perfectionism OCD. This subtype involves needing things to feel just right, symmetrical, or perfect, often to avoid a sense of unease or fear. Okay, some common obsessions with perfectionism OCD could include thoughts such as, that didn't feel right, redo it, or everything must be symmetrical, or if I don't fix this, something bad might happen. Okay, I've been experiencing this subtype of OCD a lot. I have for most of my life, but I've been noticing it particularly as I've started this podcast. Like the amount of times that I'll re-record something because it didn't feel just right or it didn't sound right, is kind of crazy. Like it's really annoying, but it brings a lot of anxiety. And so I do re-record it because I'm like, okay, wait, I actually don't want that bad thing to happen. Like, I don't want people to misunderstand or to judge or to get a wrong idea of what this actually is. And so, in an effort to get away from that anxiety, I'll re record it, right? Okay, that's compulsive. Every time that I'm re recording it or redoing it, that's solidifying this sense of anxiety around something bad might happen if I don't explain this just right. Okay, super interesting for me to realize that. Common compulsions with just right or perfectionism OCD include things such as repeating tasks until they feel perfect, rewriting or redoing work. I did this often in college. Like individuals, they don't see what's going on behind the scenes. Like a lot of people would just see like my straight A grades, right? And they'd be like, wow, like you're such a good student. And I'd be like, yes, thank you. but I don't feel like a good student, right? Like I often didn't feel like a good student. I felt like an incredibly anxious student because if it wasn't an A, then it wasn't good, right? Like it had to be, I would rewrite or redo things like over and over until I felt like they reached this standard of perfect. And it wasn't like I didn't recognize it as this sense, as this experience with OCD, but I can see it now. Like I wouldn't redo the entire assignment, but I like with essays and things, I would like reread them like multiple times before turning them in, just to make sure that I like caught any last grammatical errors, right? Like it just took so much of my time and energy, and it was truthfully really exhausting. Another common compulsion with perfectionism OCD is avoiding decisions due to fear of imperfection. Wow, I have experienced that one. I've been experiencing this at work particularly. Like I'll often just not do things or not say things. Like I have a really hard time being decisive because I'm worried that I might be doing it wrong or imperfectly. Okay, I hope that you're beginning to get a picture of like how this can be like really debilitating, how it can begin to affect so many aspects of an individual's life. And like I said earlier, like I've been experiencing this for most of my life, but I had no clue. Like I never would have identified with OCD. I never would have been like, oh yeah, that's OCD, because I thought OCD was like some mental illness that I definitely didn't have. Like that was something that individuals were either born with or they weren't. And I didn't feel like I was born with it. And so I didn't feel like I had it, right? That's like a huge misconception with OCD. Like it can come up years down the road. I was talking to an individual just this last week, and they were just telling me that their OCD, they're around my age, and they were just telling me that their OCD just popped up, like it seemed to come out of nowhere, like just a year ago. I was talking to another individual this last week who also experiences OCD, and she's quite a few years older than me. She's got kids, and she was explaining and expressing how OCD just came up for her and how she'd never had that experience previously. So it's really interesting. I feel like what's most detrimental is this view that that's something that others have and that I'm not susceptible to experience. I think what's most helpful is just taking this perspective of we're not so different. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you learned something new and that you can share it with someone else. Next week's episode is going to pick up right where this one left off. I just realized that there was way more content than we could cover in one episode, and so I needed to break it up into a few episodes. So I hope that you join next week for the continuation of this episode. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.